All right. Greetings from the Dark Continent. Conscious Caracal here, or Adams Van Sale, here to shine a light, not specifically on a matter concerning Southern Africa this time, but rather broader strategic ideas and ideas that I think are applicable not only to Western nations and people that are trying to make a difference and make a change in the balance of forces there, but also here in South Africa. And my guest here tonight to contribute to that conversation is someone that I think many of my subscribers already recognize from previous episodes here on my channel. His name is Auron MacIntyre, but you might also recognize him from Twitter. The last time you were on my channel, Auron, I think we were still joking about you being a Twitter account with a YouTube channel, but that ratio has quite improved in the meantime. So I think you can now very emphatically state that you also are a YouTube channel with a equally on the same level Twitter account. And yeah, so tonight's topic is specifically on a piece that Auron wrote, and he also turned it into a video. Speaking of his YouTube channel, on his YouTube channel, it's available there. There's a link in the description to go read it. And the title of that piece is The Importance of Capturing Castles. And I'm looking forward to the conversation. Welcome back, Auron. Thanks for your time.
Absolutely, man. Thanks for having me.
All right. So maybe just to sketch the context here for people, it's not going to be a conversation about chess. It's going to be a lot more strategic in the world of politics. I think specifically you're writing within the American political milieu specifically, but as I said earlier, I think a lot of the stuff you touch on is just as applicable for South Africa. But paint the picture for us, that for people that haven't read your piece, what is capturing a castle within our context, within the political context, rather than in the image of chess that immediately comes to mind?
Sure. So I think for especially Americans, politics is usually about different ideologies or issues. It's about, oh, well, we need to make sure to reduce taxes or get a hold of immigration policy, make sure that children aren't being taught terrible things in schools, these kind of things. And those are all very important. Like, that's all critical stuff that you should care about. But this constant cycle of chasing the issue, chasing whatever is currently in the news, what people are talking about, what's happening in the war in Ukraine, what's happening in all these different places. This current thingism that happens a lot in politics keeps people from focusing on where policy and where power actually lies. So when we talk about political castles, we're mainly talking about institutions, the places that forge and enforce policies. And so if you're trying to capture a castle, it's shifting that mentality from, well, we need to change a particular policy, though you do, or we need to change a particular law. Yes, that's important. We need to win a conversation of ideas about a particular topic. Yes, all of those things need to occur. But what really changes things over time is not those grasping at kind of abstract ideas, but the concrete control of the institutions that actually enforce those things, drive policy, lay out the white papers, lay out the way that government powers and funds is going to be allocated. So when we talk about capturing castles, we mean making sure that we have more permanent control over institutions that will continue to apply your worldview, even if a particular policy discussion kind of moves on and the public's attention span moves to something else.
And I think some examples that most people will immediately be able to connect to this concept is, for example, Elon Musk buying Twitter, a communications platform that was completely, I think, reversed in regards to who was in control when it comes to what messages are being promoted, what the algorithm is putting on people's feeds. There's been a radical change, and I think everyone can see it. I don't think there's any debate on that. And I think another classic example, somewhere where there hasn't been major ground one yet, but I think where we're seeing the starting potential of it is with educational institutions, and that we saw, for example, now with Harvard. We can get into that a little bit later, but I think those two examples, communications platforms and basically the online public squares, and then, for example, education institutions, are the most classic examples of what you're talking about here.
Well, and the reason that those two examples are so critical is they are in many ways non-political examples. Most people who think about political action would say, "Oh, well, we need to change the government. We have to change who's, running a specific bureaucracy, or who ends up
Mm.
winning the presidency or the Congress or whatever legislative body. And the answer is, well, yes, you do need to do that. However, some of the biggest wins that you can have are securing these non-governmental agencies, these castles that are not directly connected to something that is governed by the Constitution or by voting, but nonetheless have a significant impact on your political culture. So you mentioned Twitter. Elon Musk's purchase of Twitter is probably more important than any political change that has happened, except possibly the election of Donald Trump, in my lifetime. It's a significant shift in the way that the right is able to communicate and organize online. And it has nothing to do with voting, has nothing to do with passing laws, has nothing to do with winning the argument over any given ideology. It's simply the fact that a rich guy was able to acquire this format, this platform, and secure a safe home for the right to organize on, to discuss things on, to influence policy on. And again, you didn't have to involve a single election to win this political victory, but it's more significant than most elections are. And so that mentality shift is really important too. It's not just we need to capture institutions, but understand that many of the key institutions you need to capture have nothing to do with elections, nothing to do with direct governance, but still wield far more political power than any formal arm of the state.
Mm. And as I've said on my channel many times, the ANC are wrong on most things, but they're right on one thing, and that's their idea of what they call the balance of forces. So this is an old Soviet concept from the Cold War, but it's pretty much what you're explaining here is that there are many mechanisms of influencing the balance of forces in society. The balance of power is another way to put it, and capturing educational institutions, even establishing your own education institutions or communications platforms. These are all little pieces on the board. These are all ways to affect and influence that balance of forces. And I think, Auron, I don't think we're definitely not going to disagree on this, but it seems to be something that I've noticed that a lot of the debate surrounding the thing that you're talking about here, the strategy, is actually a bit misguided, where people get fixated on one strategy and say, well, this is not the way, we need to use this strategy, as if you can only really put all your eggs in one basket. There's only one way. Either you build new institutions, or you capture existing ones, or you do X, or you do Y. But there's actually no reason why you can't have a multifaceted approach towards accumulating power and building alternative centers of power. And we talked on your channel about my piece on digging trenches. That doesn't mean if you're focused on capturing castles, now you can't use any resources to dig metaphorical trenches. You can do both at the same time. And using that multifaceted approach actually gives a lot of dynamism to what you're able to achieve in the long run.
I think that's right. I think there's a temptation to say, oh, well, there's a particular strategy and we have to apply it all the time. We love these universal kind of axioms that this is always what we do and this is always the right strategy. And in any instance, this is how we should go about it. But I think that if the goal is what you have in mind, the well-being of your people, the well-being of a particular community, then you know that what you need to do is ensure that you're going to have the ability to kind of assert your influence, to push towards your objectives. And the way to achieve that is less important than the good of the people you're working
Mm.
for. And so many times that might be trying to secure an existing institution if you think it's vulnerable for takeover, but some aren't. So for instance, in the piece, I talk about the fact that Harvard is probably not going to be conservative anytime soon, right? Chris Rufo goes in there, he takes out Claudine Gay. Now, is that the perfect type of victory? No, right? The perfect type of victory is we go in and we seize Harvard, and Harvard becomes a conservative institution. We alter the culture there, we alter the ideas that are being put out, we change the balance of power there. But that's just probably not an option at the moment. So, what's the best victory you can probably achieve? Well, it's discrediting the value of Harvard. If you can't own the castle, the best thing you can do is raise it to the ground. And if your enemy is not occupying a position of power and influence inside that castle anymore, then that might be as close as you get. In some cases, like Elon Musk, you could capture the castle. Many people have set up alternatives to Twitter. We had Parler,
Mm,
we have Gab. Those have their own value, truth. They're good for those platforms to have kind of this ability to retreat there and have free speech if you can't. But the best thing to do was to take that castle. So once it became available, you should do that. That doesn't mean that Gab or these other institutions aren't worth building. And it doesn't mean that they weren't the right strategy at the time. But once you have a
mm,
superior strategy available to you, you shouldn't just say, oh, no, I don't want to go in there on principle. We can only build alternative institutions. We can never take the institution. No, the best thing to do would be to take these institutions. It's just often true that we can't. And
mm,
understanding when that's an option tactically is important. But just say giving this blanket, oh, no, we only do one thing, we only do the other. No, the purpose is victory. So we
mm.
do what wins. And when we can take the castle, we do. And when we can't, we build our own.
Mm. And in war, there are many ways of attacking your opponent. There are siege weapons, there's cavalry, there's infantry, and just saying, well, infantry wins wars, therefore we need to just focus on our infantry, disregard all the other strategies and tools that we have at our disposal. It sounds absurd when you reduce it to that, but that's what I see a lot in the discussion. That's what I see a lot in the criticisms of strategies that we see working. And as I said, we'll get to some specific examples maybe later. But that's the actually a lot of criticism that I see is that people's preferred strategy that they think is the best way is not being seen as the exclusive one. But as you mentioned there, even discrediting an opposing or hostile institution of the establishment has its place as well, and how beautifully that dovetails or complements a strategy of also building your own institution. So while your opponent's institutions are weakening in status and legitimacy, your institutions are filling the void that's being created. I think that's a perfect compliment right there.
Absolutely. If you can't own Harvard, you need to replace Harvard. But to replace Harvard, you need to discredit Harvard. Well, they're already doing that by themselves. So that's, all you have to do is kind of point that out. And that's what Rufo did, right? He just exposed something that was already happening, was already clear to anyone inside academia, but was now been made more clear to the wider audience, the wider public. So that's a good step. But if you don't have something to hand that to, then Harvard's still going to stay the same powerful institution. Okay, maybe there's less faith in the system, and if the system's corrupt, then good. But if you don't have an alternative system, if you don't have an alternative prestige network to hand over those credentialing mechanisms to hand over the research and the different academic institutional details to, then Harvard's still going to maintain the power. So it has to be both. You have to build up your own competent institutions while also
Mm,
exposing the incompetence of the current system. And
mm.
only once you have something that you can hand that power to will you have actually transitioned that into a win. So you need to work on both simultaneously, and eventually your own institution can supplant the one that has become corrupt and not useful.
Right. And I see we have a question here from the audience, and I think it fits in well with the place in the conversation where we are now. So Commodus Americanus asks, name a single institution that could be taken over and explain how to do it. I think firstly, just to a quick, just off the top of my head, I think the example that we already mentioned of a communications platform like Twitter, it would be my go-to example. I think I agree with Auron in regards to the seismic importance politically there. But Auron, your take on that question.
Yeah, so the beautiful thing about kind of the Twitter example is it's a perfect example of how to do it, but it's only one guy in the world who can do
Mm,
it, right? And
right.
that's a difficult thing for some people to hear, but there is just some truth to the level of we need rogue elites. We need
Mm,
people who look at the system and say, I can't do what I want to do under the system. Is Elon Musk the most right wing guy? Is he the most conservative guy? I don't know. I don't think so in certain areas. However, he recognizes the system he's under is not going to let him do the things he wants to do. He's not getting to Mars under the current American regime. And so he
mm,
needs to look for alternative pathways to grow power. And so having a guy like that in your corner who can do things that no one else can do is obviously an amazing option. But the average
mm,
person can't hear that. That doesn't help them. So what's something the average person can do? What's like a way that an average person can look at institutions? Well, we already mentioned education. And I think the
Mm,
intersection of especially education and accreditation is
mm,
really critical right now. One of the reasons the left holds a stranglehold, specifically in the United States, but in many other places, is that it has a stranglehold on what it means to be successful. If you want to get educated and you want to get a good job, you need a credential from a prestigious left wing institution that's going to take large amounts of your money. It's going to take possibly $100,000 or more, put you in debt immediately to that institution, indoctrinate you in the ideology of the institution. And that's the only way you can get good employment. So, how do you solve that? Well, you could start your own universities, and there are some conservative universities like Hillsdale, but they don't have the level of prestige that you would have from a Harvard or Yale.
mm,
So, something that can change is the way that businesses look for accreditation. Now, currently in the United States, civil rights law keeps basic things like IQ tests or test to check your ability to do the job. That's not allowed. It's got to be
mm,
filtered through this university mill. But something that can be done, something that is already done in the United States when it comes to the tech sector, is alternative accreditation through these different certification programs. So, for instance, if
mm,
you want to get different certification programs on running certain databases or different systems inside technology companies, you can do that, and you don't need any university degrees to get those certifications. You just have to take the test that shows that you are proficient inside those systems. Well, if you can do that constitutionally, if that's legal in that area, we could do that for other businesses. And so, what
mm,
conservative business leaders can do, and this is something that's good for the right, is that there are a lot of right wing business people. They can change the culture in their companies by allowing these alternative certification processes. And that would allow young people who are promising and bright and want to avoid the left wing indoctrination mill and don't want to hand their enemies 100,000 or more dollars and go into debt. They can take these alternative certification programs, enter into the workforce in a prestigious job, and bypass this central nexus of the leftist patronage network. I think that's a great way
mm.
that you can build your own. I guess it's not technically an institution, but you can take the institution you have, which is a business, and turn it into a way that people can avoid the current leftist institution. You can capture that, you can recapture that process, undermine the left's stranglehold on it, and make it something that allows young promising people to bypass a corrupt system.
Hmm. And I think at the same time, also, just as your strategy should be multifaceted in regards to your approaches, I think also it should be multi-leveled. Sometimes I think people get fixated on the big picture stuff of like capturing universities or winning major elections or these like major battles, but missing what's right in front of their eyes. Small town institutions, local level institutions. Are you on your school's board? Are you involved in any type of local politics? Are you involved in a locally based organization that does work in your community or that is a center of power or influence in your community? A communications platform in your own local community, like a local radio station. Are you involved in any way in one of those types of institutions? So I think when we're talking about these beachheads that can be gained, I don't think people should be not be able to look past that. It's not just top level stuff. It's not just big picture. It can be very extremely local. It can be right under your nose in your local town, in your district, in your county or province. And I think there is really the key. We should all be capturing these beachheads on the levels where we can, doing what we can with what we have. We all don't have to be little Chris Rufos or all have to be try to emulate what we're seeing more than what some of these major figures are doing on the grand stage.
No, that's a really great point. So, a practical example in the United States, we have a lot of old, dying fraternal organizations, these moose lodges, these different places that were scattered across the United States, and they were core parts of kind of American civic life. Guys got together, and yeah, they drank beer and hung out, but they also went out and raised money for charity. They took care of parks. They did all of these things that were critical to the upkeep of the area, Rotary organizations that train people for leadership and speaking, and those organizations are all dying. The boomers that were the kind of the generation that empowered those organizations and built that network, they're fading away, and they don't have anyone to hand those organizations to. They're desperate for young people to come in. And so it only takes a few guys with kind of our worldview to walk into one of those organizations and say, hey, we're going to bring in 10 young people. And they could completely change the face of that organization. And all of these places have buildings, they have connections, they have organizational infrastructure, and they're just desperate for someone to hand that legacy to. And so there's all this small town influence and power sitting on the table, just dying on the vine because no one will come and harvest it. And that's an easy way that you and just a few of your friends can get involved in your community and rescue a dying institution while also shifting a small castle in your favor.
Yeah, no, I think that's a classic excuse is, but I can't do X or Y, and then X or Y are these completely impossible goals to reach or completely impossible battles to win. Yeah, of course, you're not going to be able to save your country or save your community alone, but there are very doable and realistic goals that you can set for yourself. So just to wrap that point up, when we're talking about castles to capture, there are castles on every level of your society, every level of the society and country around you. It's not just top level stuff. Not everything has to be a Harvard scale battle. Not everything has to be a Twitter scale battle. So I'm glad that people also realize that there's battles to be won in their backyards. That's something that a lot more people need to start getting a hold of or grasping. But I see it happening. I see people not only as you said, capturing these old local institutions and doing something with them, taking them in a new direction, but also building new ones, establishing new ones. It's great to see. But I mean, that's how you do it. That's how the left have done it for decades. That's how you gain power. That's how you create little centers of influence. You go to the boring meetings. That's literally the way that many leftists gained control over school boards, over all these little local institutions, is they just went to the boring meetings. They went to the things that a lot of people didn't bother to go to. And then when they're a majority there, it's theirs, then that's theirs. They only had to outlast everyone else that couldn't bother to spend the time or to really spend one evening to go, for example, to the school board meeting or to get involved at an institution that was there for the taking.
Yeah, there's this really entertaining genre of news story in the US right now, kind of the progressive media. Every time a few conservatives get together and take control of a school board, they write these kind of panicked, pearl clutching notes about, oh, the insidious right wingers who came in and paid attention and got elected and gained the support of their community and then changed things. Like they write it like it's some kind of deep dark conspiracy theory when it's just the basic function of small town democratic politics.
It's just showing up.
It really is that simple. I used to be a local reporter, and I would go to these meetings. I'd go to the county commission meetings and the city council meetings and then the fire board meetings to do the small level reporting. And it's amazing, just nobody shows up. There's just no one there. You're exactly right that it's just dictated by a few people willing to make any kind of noise about it. And all of that feels insignificant, and it is at first, but when you change that over time, especially in the United States system where we have a federal system where there's a lot more power vested in kind of these tributaries of the government than there is in maybe some of the other more centralized systems, it's very easy for you to protect your kind of community from a large amount of the things that you don't like simply by seizing control of some of the smaller levels of power inside that area.
But Auron, before we get to another part of this conversation, I actually wanted to ask you about some of the criticisms that you potentially received in regards to this video or this piece. Were there others that we haven't addressed that you'd like the opportunity to maybe address that you saw in the discourse surrounding the strategy that you're proposing?
I think we got to most of them, oh,
Mm,
well, you can only do one kind, or all
mm,
change has to only come at this higher level. And don't get me wrong, look, I subscribe to elite theory. I think that elites are the driving force of most culture, most political change. Winning guys like an Elon Musk over is critical, but that doesn't mean that you can't practice these principles and become, kind of
mm,
the small elite in your area. Again, so much of this is just showing up. So much of this is just, kind of free power laying in the gutter of many of these institutions. And what's really more important, as we noticed early on this discussion, is not so much the government power, though that matters, but it's that community influence. And
mm,
when things go sideways, people are looking to the guys who have been there, who have shown up, who have become pillars of the community. We're just going to have to build virtue. We're just going to have to build community. We're just going to have to be the people that others can rely on. And there's no amazing kind of glamour in that early on. There's no flourish of victory as soon as that happens. But that is what's going to matter in the long run. And it's also just going to make
mm,
you a better person. So when things happen, when opportunities arise, people are going to look to you and the people who have worked with you. And I think that that's really critical, not to get stuck. I think the largest criticism is probably, well, we can't capture any institutions, we can't make these big
mm,
moves. And like you said, the answer is, okay, maybe you can't buy Twitter, I get it, but how hard would it be for you to take over the Moose Lodge and make sure that kids in your area
mm,
get Christmas presents, and make sure that there's a clean place for kids to play at the park? And all of a
mm,
sudden, when it's time for mayor or school board or sheriff, people say, "Hey, remember that guy?" Yeah, and yeah,
mm.
it seems small, but it can be a big deal.
Yeah, you can pretty much be Napoleonic. You found the Rotary Club leader badge in the
That's right,
gutter
in
and
the
you picked
gutter.
it up. No,
Exactly.
it's absolutely true. And I think also what we really can learn from a lot of these successes that we see is that there's also a morale aspect to it, is that it's so important not only to get these victories, but also just proving that it's possible. It's possible to win. It's possible to gain ground. Not everything has to be this black Paul idea of it's lost. There's nothing we can do. Anything we try is futile. That all is dispelled by just a victory, showing here's what winning looks like. Maybe you've forgotten. Doesn't matter what level it is or what facet of society it is in. You're just showing here's I've restored order in this little corner of my community, and then it grows from there. And I'm speaking from experience in seeing it happen in South Africa, where there's so many initiatives like this taking root. One recent one is I had a guest on my channel, Chris Becker, and him and the men in his community and in his neighborhood got together. They identified a local park, public park, that was being overrun by drug addicts, and there wasn't a place where families could safely take their children. They took a corner. They didn't have enough resources to secure or clean the entire park, but they identified a corner of it, a part of it that they do have the ability to clean and keep safe. And they got together, organized, did that on a Saturday morning, and now they have won back a small part of their public park. And now they plan to expand that project. Now they plan to secure more of the park, clean more of it, and soon, at this rate, they will have a secure park again in their community where families can socialize, take their children, and to play outside. And that's just one small example. Another example would be through the work that my organization AfriForum does, through filling potholes, painting street signs, planting trees, starting neighborhood watches, and then also seeing the successes from those types of initiatives. The neighborhood watches stopping a burglar, the neighborhood watches stopping a copper cable thief, and putting those victories on display, showing this is what we can achieve with what we have at the moment. Imagine if we had double. Imagine if we had triple, and then building on those. But it all starts with proving what's possible. It's so simple, but I think it's absolutely needed in our time, specifically when people are losing hope and have very low morale.
I think that's right. I mean, there's this, and it's understandable. There's this compulsion to kind of undermine every victory with saying, "Oh, well, this isn't enough." And to be fair to people who do this, and it's not like I don't point out when victories are false or they don't deliver what people think. There has been, of course, especially on the American right, a string of very hollow victories, focuses
Mm,
on things that don't matter, that don't change things in the long run, that don't have any real application. And there's a lot of kind of control of political energy on the right by doing this, by holding up these false victories. So I understand people who are skeptical of victories, but those community victories that you're talking about, those are very concrete. They're not this abstract debate. It's
mm,
like, oh man, maybe we got Bud Light to lose a percentage of market share at some point, and
mm,
take that. Now we're near the real winners. No, you can look at your community and say these kids are safer. These parents can raise their children. These women don't have to worry about being able to find a home because like there are real things that you can look and see the difference that you've made, and you don't have to guess whether or not victories are being won because you know the people whose lives are better because you're involved.
mm. And the funny thing is, there's also a sense of purpose that comes from it. Again, to get back to that example that I named of the my friend Chris Becker, who him and his friends who secured that park. We were at another meeting during a Saturday at a conference, and he was there as well. And we were chatting, and he says he has this fear of missing out now because his friends back home are now this Saturday morning. They're going back. They're doing further work in that park and securing their community. He wants to be part of it, and he feels like he's being left out now. And I mean that it's the strangest thing. People are feeling left out when they can't take part in improving their community. It's such an alien concept, but I mean, try it for once. Try doing being part of one of these initiatives, and I think you'll see the meaning that you get from, especially for men, especially young men maybe that just started families. That sense of purpose. I'm also a pillar in my community. I'm also making a difference. It's not just the concrete and brick that you're seeing. There's also a psychological element to it where it really boosts people's confidence. It boosts their fulfillment and the amount of satisfaction that they get from life. And like I said, I've seen it happen. I've seen it happen with people where if they can't go take part in that type of initiative one day, they feel like they're missing out. They want to be there on the ground. They want to be the solution. They want to be taking part. And it's amazing to see what the effect that it has is, like I said, especially on young men.
Well, and I know you said guys who are starting families, but I know a lot of young men are looking for the right people to start families with,
Mm,
right? They're looking for a woman of quality. Great way to, great sorting mechanism for that, guys, and a great way to attract that kind of thing is being influential and respected inside your community
mm,
for being a leader, for having that kind of influence, for having that kind of track record of helping others and, kind of forwarding and bettering the condition of those around you. There's no better way to simultaneously gain, confidence in yourself, build
mm,
a set of skills, attract attract attention of the right kind from the right kind of people.
mm. And something that you often write about and something that you touch on in much of your content. It's a bit of a moving on to a next topic that I really wanted to pick your brain on and expose my audience to some of your thoughts on it. I think it's so relevant, not just for your political context, your unique context in the United States, but also here in South Africa. And it's the classic question. I think you're already tired of it, but it's the question of, where does power lie? Does power lie in the Constitution as a document? Does the power lie in the presidency? Does the power lie in the laws of the country? This is something you very often touch on. You don't have to directly relate it to the specific topic of capturing castles, but I think it's also one of the pieces of the puzzle that needs to be understood and discussed more.
Yeah, I think that again, in the American political context, especially for conservatives, the idea is that power sits in elections because you just go ahead and win the debate of ideas, you win in the marketplace of ideas, you
Mm,
bring these arguments forward. Everyone is compelled by kind of the level of debate that you bring and the
mm,
solutions that you bring, the ideology that you have is superior. And then they vote for the guy that you're looking for and they end up applying that. And I think a lot of people had a hint that that wasn't how things worked, but with Donald Trump, it became very clear that even though he had won an election, even though technically he wielded the power of the executive office,
mm,
that was not really where power lied. The military did not listen to him. The different parts of even his own executive branch ignored him. many of the other branches and other other departments that should have been directly under his purview constitutionally did not pay attention to him. And so many people are sitting there wondering, okay, I won an election, the guy I won is in office, he's trying to do the things that I want them to do for once, and he doesn't have the power to do them. So if he doesn't, where is the power? And the
Mm.
answer is, I think, for many people are realizing it sits in a distributed network of institutions, and these are the castles that we're
Mm.
talking about. Right, some of them are inside the government, some are the different federal bureaus and their bureaucracies, but they're also in places like the media. They're also in places like the university. It's also in corporations and banking institutions. It's spread out across this network of different things that make the entire country run. And so you can have influence inside the government, you can win elections, but that might not be sufficient if all the other pieces of the network are working against you. Especially, and this is why castles are so important, the institutions that can protect themselves against democratic input. So if you have something like a federal bureaucracy where none of the employees can be fired and they all sit there for 30 years, then winning any given election might not actually turn over any of the policy inside the institution, because the people there know they're not going to lose their jobs. They know they can't be replaced, and no election is going to actually impact the way that they do their job. So they can continue to implement the types of policies they want to see, or they can just resist you for the 4 to 8 years you're in office until it's time for someone who's more amenable to their ideas to come in, and then they can put the gas pedal to the floor, which is how it happens with many American institutions. And so
Mm.
it's really that shift of mindset from power sits formally in the handful of people I vote for, to no, power is distributed and consolidated inside these different institutions that are actually built to withstand democratic input. And that's where things are actually formed over the long run.
Yeah, and it definitely is a web. I mean, the power sits in the New York Times. It sits at Harvard. It sits in but pretty much. I think the best example from the South African context is again with our constitutional rhetoric, where a lot of the political rhetoric that you'll hear is that the Constitution is supreme. The Constitution is very clear. So therefore, this is the reality that it will produce. There's no we know what the outcome of this court case will be because the Constitution is clear. But that doesn't line up with reality. The Constitution is a document, but what is written in the document is interpreted by these institutions that you are describing here. So the institutions like the courts or the universities or the media houses can interpret that Constitution any way they like. And you only have to look at a country like South Africa. There are many other cases all across the world about how you can pretty much make a Constitution mean anything you want. It's really not that difficult. It's not. I think a lot of Americans still cling to the idea that your Constitution is ironclad. There's no way to twist what's being said there. You just need the right incentive for one of these institutions to push in a certain direction. It can mean anything you want. It's that old joke of the lawyer that pretty much just tells you that when you put a contract in front of him and ask him what does this line in the contract mean, and then he looks around and he closes the door, closes all the window blinds, and he's like, what do you want it to mean?
Yeah.
It's the exact same thing with a constitution. It's those that are interpreting it that hold many of the power. Very often they're not individuals, but rather these institutions that you're talking about.
Yeah, I think we've talked about this before, but the current understanding of a constitution is rather poor. In a classical sense, the Constitution is almost entirely unwritten. It's something that arises from the nature of the people, the community, the tradition, the folkways, the shared history, language, religion, the moral view, and where they want to go. That is what is the Constitution. That arises organically from the people. If it ends up being written down at some point, that's fine. But the written words on the document are not what actually brings about the governance of the nation. Those are simply a momentary instantiation of what is a much more richly detailed and organic kind of governance that comes from the spirit of the people. And when we move, I think the temptation is twofold. One, we think of ourselves as very enlightened and disenchanted people. We don't think about the spirits of a nation, the metaphysical animating spirits of a nation anymore. We think of ourselves as very cold and logical and legal, especially in the Anglo tradition, right? We like to have that Anglo constitutional legal tradition. Everything is written down, rule of law, very strong. And so we think that we don't need to think in those terms anymore because everything is very factual and cold and placed on paper. I think also as we move further away from being cohesive people, as we see more and more of these countries transformed in kind of these multi-ethnic, multilingual, multicultural liberal democracies, we have to rely on the words on paper because we don't share a spirit, we don't share a tradition, we don't share values, we don't share often even languages anymore. And so obviously South Africa has its own kind of grab bag of kind of those different backgrounds. But I think more and more countries are moving into this situation where the Constitution, the legalism of it is supposed to protect everybody from everyone else. But that's not the way you want to bind a country together. Like having a piece of paper that's supposed to protect everyone from everyone else's adversarial interests is no way to actually cohere into a nation that can grow and prosper. And so I think that's the reason that constitutionalism is kind of running into this wall of multiculturalism and kind of modernity simultaneously.
Hmm. One of my favorite comments from the expropriation without compensation discourse in South Africa. Yes, I know it's a dragged out thing, and you've been hearing about it for many years, but it's still ongoing. We're still seeing what the ANC are going to try and do to property rights. But anyway, that's a discussion for another day. But one of my favorite comments from that discourse so far was when a journalist asked a government representative, but isn't expropriation without compensation unconstitutional, grabbing people's land and not giving them any compensation for it? And he said, no, it's not unconstitutional. That's why this process of that we're going through exists. We're going to amend the Constitution to ensure that it is constitutional. So there's nothing unconstitutional about the idea.
Yes.
And he says it without flinching. But I mean, he's just being honest. He's just saying the quiet part out loud. He's just saying exactly how power works, where if interpreting the Constitution in a certain way doesn't work, then there are avenues to change a constitution and to pretty much bend it to your will. But on that note as well, when it comes to many of the ideas that we've seen come from the whole rhetoric around what happened at Harvard, many of the ideas that you discuss in your piece, there is a manifesto that also did the rounds by Chris Rufo, and I think at this point millions of people have read it. We're not going to be going into all the detail of it, but there's an angle in it that I really want to hear your thoughts on, and that's he really takes aim at this old conservative mantra of facts don't care about your feelings. And I'm talking about conservative really purely in the American party politics context. But Chris Rufo really doesn't seem to share that philosophy of if we just bring the right facts to the table, everything is going to fall into place. Now, for people in our circles, taking aim at this idea or criticizing it is not mind-blowing stuff. It's really not going to change it's not going to make you sit back and have your eyebrows lift up. But it is quite revolutionary in the broader picture, when you take the zeitgeist, the total zeitgeist into account. It's quite a radical departure from the rhetoric from just a few years ago. What was your thoughts on specifically that angle appearing in this manifesto of Rufo?
Yeah, it's a critical thing that needs to change. Like you said, the slogan of "facts don't care about your feelings" was really the kind of the banner of conservatism for a very long time. We have all the right arguments since at least the 80s in the Reagan administration. It's been the idea that we've accumulated all the correct arguments. None of this is debatable. It's very clear that we've laid out all of the facts and figures. And so there's nothing you can do but eventually kind of just capitulate to our overwhelming intellect and kind of move forward. But after decades of uninterrupted losses by the right, it's become very clear that that just is not how that works. That's not how human beings work. It's not how politics work. And it's definitely not how democratic politics work. In fact, it works pretty much exactly the opposite. Feelings care very little about your facts, and people are going to vote their interest. Yes, sure. But their interest is going to be kind of understood in the context of their feelings about how they're doing, how they're prospering, whether they're prospering or not, whether they think that their children have a future, what they think a future even looks like, if they think it's worth having children. These are all questions that are not fact based. If you sit around and do the the pluses and the minuses for having a family, the pros and cons, yeah, as kind of a self-centered single person, you'll almost always end up with more cons, but you'll end up a more miserable person if you go with that intellectual understanding of your well-being. And so I think it's a very relatively new idea that you have to have this kind of cold, logical understanding of every political issue, and a very foolish one, especially in light of the evidence, that that's going to be the way that you compel people forward. We've been told for so long on the American right that you can't fight the culture war. You just can't fight the culture war. The facts aren't with you. The facts are in your economic policies. They're in all these other things. People want to hear about tax cuts and they want to hear about freedom. They don't want to hear about culture war issues. Well, what do we see? We look around us and we see actually the candidates with the most success, guys like Ron DeSantis in Florida, guys with like Trump at the national level. They're the ones who were willing to get into the cultural issues, the ones who are willing to discard what were supposed to be the facts about economics and protectionism, or the facts about border security, or the facts about education. And instead, we're willing to say, you have values, you feel a certain way about these things, you care about them, and we're going to address those things. And that's created far more energy than the right has seen in decades.
No, it's I can't remember who said it, but there's that idea of people are not willing to die for tax cuts or for GDP growth. That's not what animates people, and you're nowhere in history you're going to find that. But many people have been convinced somehow that these are the driving forces, the passions within man's heart is GDP growth and tax cuts and just all these materialist ideas. But I mean, at the same time, you can see it so clearly that when it comes to you don't even have to be a historian. You don't even have to do a deep dive into history to see what moves people's hearts, what really drives people towards doing heroic things, but also things where death is a certainty. What are we people willing to die for is really the question. And hopefully conservatives and people on the right are rediscovering the answer to that question. What drives a man to go to battle? What drives people to really put things on the line? And to get back to that idea of facts don't care about your feelings, it's definitely not exclusively just facts. It's definitely not just I'm going to war to prove that there are only two genders in regards to the facts. It's what overarching narrative is really lighting the fire in my heart, what really drives me as a person. It's not going to be some internet meme of there's two genders, facts don't care about your feelings, get wrecked, libs.
Yeah, there's this great book R.R. Reno wrote called Return of the Strong Gods. And it talks about why nationalism and populism are on the rise, and basically saying what you're saying. Look, everyone's done being invested in economics now. There's simply nothing left for the idea that we're just going to optimize each one of these areas, and that nations are simply pieces of paper or GDPs. But they have to have an animation, something that binds them together, that is far more than some intellectual commitment to even an ideology. And that scares a lot of people. That's something that a lot of people, even people on the right, don't want to talk about, because they've been trained to say, well, no, these are dangerous. The old gods are dangerous. We can't engage with them anymore. But Reno says, look, I'm a kind of a liberal Democrat, but these things are coming whether you like it or not. And so you can stand around saying, oh, no, whatever you do, don't engage with this, and hand those forces over to people who are going to do bad things with them. Or you can make sure that those forces are turned towards something that's going to better your community, that's going to kind of increase the human flourishing of those in your nation. But what you can't do is just sit around and deny them, because they're going to break through either way. And I think that's what we're talking about a little bit when we say that this is the end of the facts don't care about your feelings. Those old gods are kind of returning. The feelings, this is the year of feelings. 2024 is the year of feelings. And if you're not comfortable speaking in those terms, communicating in those terms, you're going to lose. And we can kind of see that just in things like the Republican primary right now.
Absolutely. And I see Rosa says why this is why the Afrikaners are more of a nation than South Africa itself. Well, it comes down to that question. I think Samuel Huntington put it perfectly at the turn of the century, or just before the turn of the century, where he said the post-Cold War world is not going to be defined by economics or ideology. The driving force in the post-Cold War world is going to be the question, who are we? And the people who can answer that question are going to be the winners, and the people that don't have an answer are going to be the losers. It's that simple. And I think that, again, even something as simple as who are we is it speaks to the heart of people. That's what you and me have been talking about here at near the end of this show now, is specifically those types of questions, not what makes people rich or what makes people materially wealthy. It's questions of identity. It's questions of where do we come from, who are we, and where are we going, and what do we really want to achieve? What's the legacy we want to leave behind? What is that we want to be remembered for? And these are the things that, like I said, you don't even have to be like a history buff to realize that these are the driving forces that drive people. Humans aren't these reason machines. We are more often than not very deeply irrational, to the frustration of people like Sam Harris. They would just like to frame humanity as these meat machines, these little meat computers that just compute ones and zeros, look at cost benefit, what makes my life more materially wealthy and not, and I'm going to do that. That's not how humans work. I can't remember who made this point, but it's the point of the secular or atheist materialist can't explain why a soldier falls on a hand grenade to save his comrades in war. There's no explanation for it from that angle.
No, that's absolutely true. And again, this is a question that we thought we had suspended. We thought we had suspended well, I'll make the reference later. I can't remember the name, but we thought we had suspended the political. We thought that we had suspended kind of this eternal struggle for dignity and identity, kind of inside the human being. And I think that South Africa obviously has this, but I don't think that it's unique to South Africa at this point. There's many nations, the United States included, where the idea of the nation state no longer is sufficient to kind of draw this answer this question of who are we. And so we need something more, and the successful nations or successful peoples inside of current nation states will be those that can find that answer, satisfactory answer that binds them together in the way that these other peoples that are kind of disintegrating do not.
And as we start wrapping up here, there was one more comment that Rufo made in his piece that I wanted to get your thoughts on. It's very simple. He just says that he sees the right reorganizing. Now, maybe in the way that you prescribe in your piece, maybe a bit more wider than that. What are your thoughts on this idea? Is this just is this just, as the kids say, cope, or is this actually something that you're seeing around you and something that you see tangible examples of, a reorganization, a new view on, again, a simple question: what does winning look like, and what does actually securing a future look like?
I think there's a lot of the commentariat or the kind of the institutional right that still is trying to cling to the kind of old neoconservative version of the right in the United States. But I would say that the base is pretty clearly fed up with that. They're pretty done with that. Again, I think you can look at recent electoral results to see that repudiation. The question is, what does the right become, right? I think he's right that it is restructuring, but the battle now is over what it becomes. And I think there are many different factions looking from, no changes at all to very small corrections to drastic reorganization of the way that the right views itself, the way that it views its goals. And I think all of that is kind of up for grabs at the moment, which is why it's an exciting moment, but we also see a lot of heated clashes, a lot of, territorial disputes, because a lot of people have an idea of what the next phase of kind of this political organization should be in the United States. The one thing they at least collectively know is it's not working. And that is a good sign, even if kind of what it will be next is a question that's still unanswered.
Mm. It's actually, I think, quite healthy for any people that really want to see a change in direction. When some of the most heated debates are not about current events or current issues, but about strategy. Really, people getting really angry at each other and butting heads quite ferociously over questions of strategy. Not even talking about, well, this current conflict or this current thing. Just talking about what is the way forward, what should we be doing, and that those debates being some of the most heated that I've seen, I think is very healthy. That's what I want to see. I don't want people wasting all their time just getting into heated debates just about the current thing. You need to be talking big picture as well, and I think it's quite nice to see. Or in the final question here, before we wrap up, is I just ask all my guests this, and it's quite simple. If you could leave the audience with something to ponder or think about this week, it can be a simple idea, it can be a rhetorical question, anything that you'd like to leave them with at the back of their minds, what would that be?
I was not prepared for a deep thought to leave people with. I would say one thing that is sparked up a little bit, but I think is good for people to think about is the system is what it does. There's a
Mm,
little catchphrase that has started going around. I was already writing about this before I knew what that catchphrase was, but that does encapsulate it well. A lot of people look at systems and they just look at their declared intention. What was that system designed to do? What's it labeled, right? As
mm,
opposed to what product does it consistently produce? What outcome does it consistently produce? And if you kind of evaluate systems more by what they regularly produce, but what they're labeled, but instead of what they're labeled to do, I think you'll have a deeper insight into how systems work.
Well, I think you gave ample homework there to the audience to ponder. I think it's a great way to end it. Oren, lastly, this is not even a theory question. It's just, where can people find you? Where can they find your work? How can they support what you do?
Oh, sure, absolutely. Well, I've got, of course, the YouTube channel. You can catch everything also on Blaze TV. If you want to listen to things as podcasts instead of watching the video, of course, you've got the Auron MacIntyre show on all the different podcast networks. And then all of my articles appear on the Blaze. I've got a Substack where they kind of land first if you want to sort them out there.
Perfect. All right. And there's also, for all those too lazy to go use the search function, all of those links are in the description of the YouTube channel. Or if there's any links there that are not currently included, just send me a DM and I'll put it there as well. But I think everything should be there. And then lastly, just thank you everyone for tuning in. Thank you for your questions and comments. And thank you also for sharing this the stream wherever you can. I really appreciate everyone that does that. And I hope you found some of the ideas that we discussed insightful. I hope you got some new angles on strategy and the bigger picture, and also what you can do. It's not just something you can leave for those that you think are greater and stronger and smarter than you. This is something that we all can take part in. There are castles in every facet of society, not just there on in the top level on the mountain tops, but also in your very backyard that can be captured. So I'm very glad that people are catching on to that life hack. But yeah, thank you very much for tuning in. Thank you for sharing. And if you're new to this channel and like this type of conversation, you can subscribe. You can also, if you're catching this and it's no longer live, you can still take part in the conversation by leaving a comment in the comment section. I read all of them and appreciate your feedback. It's always very interesting to hear what you guys, your takes as well on the topics discussed. Auron, thank you very much for your time. Keep writing, keep creating content. And thank you again for sharing your insights here with us tonight and elaborating a bit on your great piece.
Thanks again, man. Always good talking to you.
All right. Cheers, guys. Have a good one, and God bless.